What's up guys, and welcome to this introductory video on the actual play I'm running. As a forewarning, the first episode will feel like it's in the middle of a campaign itself, mainly because it is. I started recording it at first, but I didn't feel confident in my GMing and didn't like how I was running it. I decided to put a pause on recording for a couple of months till I now feel like I can do a decent job. I'll be going into detail on the players and their characters in this video, along with a summary of events till the point of the first episode. So let's get into what the game is about. It's a pulp action setting in the mid-1930s with some bits of supernatural mixed in. So Indiana Jones, but elements of Van Helsing and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen to give a better example of what the setting is. Granted, two of the movies aren't that great, and there's at least one, the Indiana Jones series, no one wants to talk about. The game system I'm using is the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. Its primary selling point is for the fast, furious play and to brush aside much of the realism and prep that much like the movies about family tend to do. Main reason for this is that I wanted something that allowed for me to give free and loose style and to ultimately have fun. Could have achieved something like that with a Powered by the Apocalypse game, but I also wanted something with more substance. Plus, I'm not a big fan of those systems. They always feel a bit constricting with moves and never great for long-term play. There are a few rules that I have added or changed for both the players and my enjoyment. I will add these at the end of the video because ultimately they're not as important as the narrative of the campaign. We start in August of the year 1935, a special lodge that was established by the Organization of the Supernatural Investigators of Treasure, Rare Locations, Espionage, and Paranormal, or SITREP for short. SITREP formed late December of 1934 due to interests of national powers beginning to come to light. Several wealthy members of society that know what can lurk in the darkness grew worried about the potential dangers of various supernatural items going into the wrong hands. Unfortunately, their days of fighting the forces of evil have long since been behind them, so they must bring in a newer breed. First, we have Sean Dublin, an Irishman that comes from a good line of wealth. He primarily works as a reporter for the Republic Times newspaper, though as of late, he's been focusing investments into metal and munitions that brings positive returns. He's written highly of the British Navy and has been honored by some of the Admiralty as a propaganda machine. He has purchased from the Navy an extremely experimental dingo car that can hold up to 5 people, though it's fairly cramped in the back. He is the main face of the Alpha team and also fronts the funds necessary for the team's needs. As for why he's decided to take this line of work as a hobby, it's unknown. Notably, he does not believe in the supernatural and has to this point luckily avoided any sightings of it, though for how long it is unknown. Next, we have the pilot Carl Bauer. German-born but immigrated to the US with his family after the Great War. His parents were skilled monster hunters in the early 1900s till eventually the last culling in 1911. In their full retirement, Carl eventually inherited their experimental PBY Catalina. The plane was originally his brother Walter's, but was left to Carl when he left their failing startup to return to Germany. Ultimately, Carl had to sell the Catalina to SITREP, but was luckily able to get a contract with them to act as their pilot and mechanic for the plane. Originally thinking that the tales of monsters of the night and the supernatural were just fairy tales, he has begun to see that there is truth to them after all. The muscle of the group is Montre. Although he is around the size and rough shape of a typical man, he is anything but. Montre is a mechanical being from an unknown ancient society that has slowly begun to make more appearances as of late. He was discovered by the team of Dr. Luc Leroux, who had gone to search for ancient ruins in Peru. Montre was found in a sort of stasis state, sitting on what looked like a throne and hidden tomb within a site of Incan ruins. The doctor managed to accidentally reactivate Montre, fortunately wasn't killed for doing so. Dr. Leroux has since brought Montre into SITREP to keep him secret with the help of the lodge head William Bates. Harlen and Sean are the only ones in the team that does not know Montre's secret. To fill in the need for historical knowledge, Effie Dawson was brought into the Alpha team due to the relatively successful career of archaeology. Her father was in line to be a world-renowned archaeologist, but all credit was taken from him by his former trusted partner, Dr. Ignacio Cueva. This led to Effie's father being branded as a fraud and his reputation to never recover, even after death. In one of Effie's digs in Algeria to restore her father's good name, she found an old leather-bound book that has managed to stay well-preserved for who knows how long. The book at least seemed to be in a new unknown language, when suddenly a few words started glowing within it. When the words are read, Effie is able to summon the spirits of an area to help her, either by asking them questions or by using them in the heat of battle. The only member of the team that doesn't know about her abilities is Sean, who doesn't believe in the supernatural to begin with. Harlen Tanner was born in a small family of miners in America. Though he may not have had as much money growing up, but still had all the necessities. Despite that, a feeling of wanting more began to brew inside of him. Started out as breaking just a few laws here and there, but by the time the prohibition started, he progressively got worse. While working part-time at a speakeasy, he developed a taste for gambling. This leads him to getting caught cheating and getting bruised up quite a bit. After being thrown out and being labeled as a bit of a scoundrel, Harlen's looking like he would be heading towards ever so darker lines of work. Luckily for him, he was given an opportunity by wielding Bates to put his particular set of skills to use, though Harlen sees this as more of a chance to please his desire for excitement without getting in major trouble with the law. Only the future will show if this thrill-seeking will catch up to him. Now that we've done a brief background on the characters, let's move on to the story so far. We begin with the arrival of Sean Dublin at the Westham England Lodge. Sean pulls in with his dingo scout car, to which he mistakes Carl, who was working on the Catalina at the time, for a typical mechanic or servant of the lodge. Carl's handed keys to get the dingo parked before being given a manifest for a mission. Sean makes it to the main foyer where Harlen is waiting to the side, leaning against a wall, and Effie sitting in a chair reading her ancient book. After a brief discussion with Dr. Leroux, Montre enters the room. A few moments later, a man that appears to be in his mid to late 20s enters the main foyer. He stands at 5'7" with medium-length brown hair, a clean-shaven face, and green eyes. He dresses in a white button-up shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbow, a pair of wire spectacles, a black tie, and trousers. He introduces himself as William Bates, the handler of the lodge. He then informs everyone about the mission they're being tasked with in Xi'an, China. A foreign organization is reported to be setting up operations there and appears to likely be militarized. The main goal is to obtain information about the organization and report back. If there is a chance to keep any relics or treasures from falling into wrong hands, do so to the best of their ability. Within a couple hours, the team packs up and sets flight to a small town outside Xi'an, China. Due to some bragging from Sean Dublin, Carl felt comfortable enough to let Sean take the stick on occasion, not knowing he has absolutely no skill with flying. This leads to the flight being only halfway pleasant, but is easily brushed off as hitting bad turbulence from time to time. Flying over the area, the team spots an encampment with several trucks parked, and people coming in and out of a hole in the ground. Next, they spot the town and decide to drive there after landing. When the team arrives at the town, they see a couple of trucks full of townsfolk hopping in with mining tools as another group hop out of another truck, covered with dirt and mud. Carl decides to go look at some of the wares of the market, noticing that one stall has a package of German cigarettes. He decides to go ahead to purchase them despite them being overpriced. The rest of the group goes to meet with the town head and inquire about the happenings of the town. They learn that there's a group from what they can tell is from Europe. They arrived a week prior to the team getting there and have been hiring townsfolk to dig for them. As for why, they're not sure, but there's something that the group has interest in that area. The team decides to set out to the encampment to confirm their suspicions. Once they make it close to what appears to be the base, tall chain-link fences wall the area with sandbags lining them. Several trucks are parked inside along with a half-track and a small four-seater car that has top folded down. Multiple tents that seem to hold bunks are placed evenly. Two tents seem different from the others, possibly belonging to the people in charge of the group. The team decides to split up with Effie and Sean going through the front in the guise of wanting to buy fuel for the plane, since the group of interest has a makeshift airport not far from the base itself. The others get out of the dingo earlier and scout ahead to find a way inside. Carl and Harlen go in disguise, while Montre just focuses on sneaking in broad daylight. Effie and Sean are greeted at the base entrance by several soldiers dressed in gray uniforms, though no major markings other than what are probably the soldiers' rankings. As they speak, it is obvious that these are Germans that they're dealing with. Few of them have rifles, one a light machine gun, and one soldier that appears to be an officer of the squad is holding a submachine gun. After some good convincing of Sean's part, he and Effie are led in to eventually speak with the heads of the operation. In the meantime, while Carl and Harlen were scoping things out, Montre gets a bit distracted and curious about the half-track. Before anyone can do anything, he just rips his way through the chain-link fence and climbs underneath it, essentially tearing it apart to see how it works. The soldiers, in their shock, don't immediately shoot and do their best to pull out the metal man, who is leagues heavier than they imagined. Harlen and Carlen just take the opportunity to sneak in. Harlen does his best to sneak in with the workers, while Carlen decides to hop into the half-track. This was before he knew Montre was going in to cause a scene near it. Back to Effie and Sean, they go through a mine shaft that has workers constantly moving in and out of. After what feels like a quarter of a mile, they reach what seems to be a nexus point, where the workers are split between three paths. There are a few other soldiers that are standing guard and making sure everyone is working. The officer takes them to two gentlemen. One of that appears to be a higher-ranking officer with the marks of an SS soldier, and the other is best described as a stereotypical creepy scientist. The officer introduces himself as Captain Karl Gans, and the scientist is Dr. Hector von Widman. After brief introductions, the captain takes Effie and Sean to his tent while the doctor stays behind. When Sean and Effie are back outside, they see the display of several soldiers dragging Montre over by the open training field section of the base. They walk past and go inside the captain's tent where they begin to discuss business. primarily getting the extra fuel for the plane, but then going into as to why the Germans are digging in the middle of China. The captain speaks about looking for the tomb of China's first emperor. A rarely known legend says that the crown has magical properties and the ability to control an army. Sean doesn't believe it, but of course Effie does. After a small discussion about the supernatural, they leave the tent and attempt to rescue Montre. Sean manages to convince them that Montre is a veteran of the Great War and is not all there in the head. In the meantime, Carl manages to knock out one of the guards wielding a submachine gun with the help of Harlen. Carl then strips the soldier of his uniform and weapon, along with taking the machine gun off the now heavily disabled half-track. Harlen on his side is able to snatch some dynamite before the two sneak out on their own. The team meet back up at a fair distance away from the camp to discuss what they learned. They split the team again by dropping off Effie, Montre, and Harlen at the town to talk to the town leader about the legend that the captain told them. Harlen and Sean head back to Catalina to refuel it. The leader gives Effie an old book that contains a lot of legends of China itself. Skimming through the book, Effie finds the same legend the captain told her. They find out that the author is actually buried nearby and decide to go there for more clues as to find the exact location of the tomb. Effie uses her powers to read the book in order to commune with the old author. They learn that the rough location, discovering that the Germans are actually in the right area, but the entrance is actually near the makeshift airport. Harlen is mentally scarred by this interaction, while Montre is excited seeing the magic from his original time. The team meets back up again to discuss what the next step is. After a somewhat crazy discussion of a plan for a touch-and-go pickup, the team decides to send a disguised Carl in with a stolen uniform and have Harlen scout out the area. Sean and Montre and Effie keep watch at the hill nearby. The team then notice that a lot of townsfolk are now gathering in front of the base, causing a racket. Carl manages to distract the soldiers stationed to guard the area while Harlen sneaks over to the suspected entrance area. After a little bit of looking, he notices that some stones seem to be a bit odd and out of place. Harlen digs underneath the stones to discover that one has a rope attached to it. He decides to pull on the stone, causing a cavity to open up in the ground nearby. This causes a large amount of noise that catches the attention of the guards that Carl was distracting. In a sudden panic, he makes a judgment call to open fire on the guards, killing them both. Sean drives the dingo down to the newly opened entrance and decides to wait outside to watch over Montre, who is working on disassembling the plane the Germans had parked at the airport. Effie, Harlen, and Carl head down into the tomb and discover several hallways that are lined with statues of soldiers, though it appears that all of them have completely different faces from one another. Eventually, they run into some Germans that are holding up a section of the tomb with a machine gun and a couple of SMGs. Effie manages to gather a large amount of spirits that coalesce at a point, launching one soldier into another, sending them both into the wall, knocking them both out. Carl didn't see it and thinks she activated some sort of trap. Harlen manages to swiftly kill the other, despite his sanity breaking a bit further. The three make it to the main sanctum of the tomb, containing the ornate coffin and a large crown sitting on top of an altar. The captain and doctor are also in the room when they are stopped just before grabbing the crown. After a brief discussion, the team decides to stop the Germans, with Effie summoning spirits to reach up from the ground and grab them. Carl, despite seeing this somewhat horrifying display, tries to shoot at the two, missing a couple of shots, one of them which managing to hit and break the crown. Suddenly, a large wisp of green energy launches from the crown, moving through several people till possessing one of the knocked out soldiers. The soldier begins to rise and floats in the air, presenting himself as the former emperor. The captain and doctor attempt to persuade the emperor to join them, but Carl and Harlen come up with a different plan. Using one of the sticks of dynamite, Harlen lights and tosses it at the emperor, seemingly exploding him and causing the tomb to start collapsing. The team managed to make it out on time, though Carl takes a rock to the head trying to pick up the machine gun on the way out. A chase ensues with a couple of trucks chasing the group. Sean manages to take out some of the soldiers with the machine gun on the dingo. Harlen makes a miraculous shot with his Colt, taking out one of the soldiers, who then follows up by taking out another one of his buddies. Effie uses her power to cause a tree to topple over and completely take out one of the trucks, tailing them. Carl ends up fist-fighting a soldier that jumped on the back of the dingo, but with the help of Sean is able to knock him off. In the midst of all the shooting, Effie catches a stray and gets knocked unconscious. With some steady handling and miraculous luck, Carl manages to pull out the bullet with a pair of pliers he had lying around, then cauterizes the wound with the hot barrel of his SMG. Eventually, the group manages to get away, quickly packing everything up and flying back to the lodge. The team debrief Bates and takes the mission to go to Italy, where Sean decides to purchase some real estate and a brand new car, as well as taking the team to get some new formal attire. Eventually, they meet up with the main informant, Athos Vescovi, who claims to have found a lead for getting into the catacombs of a Roman Caesar. Athos himself is an interesting person to say the least. He is caffeinated out of his mind while he babbles about needing to pay off rent, the government watching him, and who knows what else. He is also well versed in explosives and has made himself known of his methods, and can be considered a bit of a terrorist by the government, but to a few, a freedom fighter, due to his disdain for the Italian government. Athos has obtained some old documents that have been poorly maintained and have coffee stains on some. This horrifies Effie quite a bit. After some discussion, they discover that the entrance is either at the Colosseum or the Bath of Caracalla, but the group wanted more information on what was down there, so Sean and Effie stay behind to do more research on the documents and try to reserve some time slots for a tour of the ancient sites. After some chaotic directions from Athos, they make it to the museum that seems to be retrofitted to be a headquarters of sorts, where several soldiers patrol around the wall. After little to no helpful insight on how Athos managed to steal the documents he had, Harlen spots a good building that he can use to jump inside the facility. Carl and Athos act as a distraction while Harlen does his thing and sneaks around. Athos suggests explosives but is quickly shot down. Ultimately, Carl resorts to tossing rocks at the windows of the facility from a different building. This works as a few soldiers start going to the building they're in. Harlen easily manages to get into the facility and retrieve the rest of the documents without getting detected. Carl and Athos attempt to make their getaway by jumping out the second-story window. Carl lands fine. Athos lands on his face, somehow only gets scuffed up a little. The two attempt to blend in, but Carl still gets spotted. Suddenly, a Molotov gets thrown from a nearby crowd, landing in front of a couple of soldiers. This gives Carl some time to commandeer a car to make a quick getaway. In the midst of the chaos, Athos jumps in front of Carl's car and landing on top of the hood. Again, somehow not taking any major damage. Eventually, everybody meets back up before driving back to Sean's estate. With the new set of documents in hand, they discover the tomb holds a dagger that was used to take the life of Julius Caesar. The shape of the dagger is familiar to Montre, as it is a dagger that was used to transfer the souls of a living person to a mechanical construct like himself. The team decides the next course of action is to go to one of the sites and look for the Caesar's seal that the document says will be near the catacomb entrance. Sean uses his wealth to get the time slots reserved for the sites for the private tours. Though they find out the Colosseums are reserved, so they settle for the Bath. Along with the tour, Sean has several restaurants cater for the event. Once the tour begins, Sean enacts his on-the-spot master plan, which is to get the tour guide drunk and send Carl to distract her, with Sean and Montre distracting the catering crew. Effie and Harlen search for the entrance. After some time of searching, they find the Caesar's seal in a spot with an eroded indent obscuring a button. The two push a button, opening an entrance to a catacomb that leads fairly deep down. Harlen and Effie head down to find another door with a button much like the first. Pressing it opens the door, revealing a stretch of hallway that has indents with decayed ancient corpses lying rest. Once a step in was taken, a plate sinks slightly down into the ground. Not long after, several of the dead start awakening with a red glow in their eyes. Harlen decides to do the smart thing and just rush past the undead while Effie attempts to knock them over. Unfortunately, her spells don't have much effect against them at the moment. Harlen continues through another hallway, waking up a few more undead, though this time they're wearing armor. Effie decides to run and get help since her powers aren't being effective at the moment, while Harlen continues to run down the hallway. Harlen makes it to a smaller room where a platform rises, revealing a large decayed war dog with the same red eyes as the other undead. He decides to shut the door behind him to fight the dog one-on-one. Effie manages to get Carl to help out. Unfortunately, he managed to jam up his shotgun with the very first shot. Eventually, Montre comes in to help with his club. The first swing seems to completely miss one undead, almost smacking into the back of the head of Carl, but Carl manages to duck down in time, allowing the club to swing into a different undead, taking it out. The two clear up the rest of the undead in the hallway while Harlen takes care of the war dog inside, with some close calls in between. The team continues on through the catacombs. Sean stays back and distracts the caterers by explaining the sudden running off and the sudden loud noises as a sex thing. The rest of the team continue onward for a while till they reach a larger room. They see 3 rows of walls that have indents like the hallways from before, though the bodies seem to be wrapped up and have warts placed on them. They also find a pile of the same wrapped bodies that seem to be neatly placed at first, but at a certain point were starting to be tossed over. They also do not possess the same warnings as the ones in the indents. In another part of the room, they find some old Roman weapons, but it is uncertain if they be in good working condition. Lastly, there are several rows of sarcophagi, evenly placed and lined up. Each one has a plaque of a past Caesar, with the exception of one, Julius. The only other thing of note in the room is a large set of double doors that have 2 stone statues of centurions. When one of the team goes to open the door, both the statues come to life with the eyes glowing the same as the undead they've encountered. Carl attempts to shoot one with a shotgun, but it doesn't fire right away. As he goes to inspect it, the shell goes off, hitting Montre, though only doing minor superficial damage in the process. Montre takes the acquired minigun from the trip in China and unloads a large burst into one statue, practically reducing it to rubble. Carl quickly loads a slug into the chamber and uses it to shoot the other statue, blowing a hole through it and disables it. After a quick dust off and a change to slugs for Carl's shotgun, the team proceeds through the doors. After one last short hallway, the team makes it to what looks like an inner sanctum. Inside there are 3 people. 2 are visibly armed with machine guns. Each one of them is dressed in a black trench coat and fedoras, though one is visibly larger than the other 2. Everything in the room seems to be made of marble. There are also several rows of seats in front of an altar that is holding a black ceremonial knife with gold trimmings. Behind the altar is a sculpture of a man carved into the wall. The group are less than welcoming to the team and attempt to threaten them to leave. Carl and Montre attempt to get as close as possible before the 2 grunts point their guns at them respectively, with the one in charge pointing his sawed-off double-barreled shotgun at Montre. After some failed attempts at talking down the opposing group, Carl takes a cheap shot at the one in charge, almost killing him in one shot. A shootout begins and Carl gets heavily wounded by one of the grunts, Montre taking heavy damage from the other grunt and the guy in charge, but manages to grit through some of it to mow down the grunt that shot him. Harlen gives a clean, nice shot with his pistol to kill the grunt that shot Carl. The one in charge attempts to take a spiteful shot at Carl to finish him off, but the other shell explodes in his own face, ending his own life. After the hectic short time has passed, the team brush themselves off before Harlen and Effie work to patch Carl pretty much good as new, though extremely sore. The team searches the now deceased group in hopes of finding some sort of signifier on who they were with. Unfortunately, all they find is some money and whatever weapons they had on them. The group then goes to inspect the dagger and the altar that it's in. They find out the altar has a mechanism that allows the knife to either go further or be pulled straight out. They elect to go with the latter. On closer look on the dagger, it has the words "Et tu, Brute" inscribed on the side of it. Montre also notices the dagger currently has a soul in it. Not wanting to risk finding out what would happen if one of the others were accidentally cut or stabbed by it, he wraps the dagger in a bunch of cloth and keeps it on his person. The team then leave to meet up with Sean, who's gotten the tour guide and the casting crew to leave at this point. Athos finally shows up, who is told not to come along, and claims to have brought the explosives. After a few facepalms, the team returns to Sean's new vacation home to rest for the evening. The next morning, Carl meets up with the tour guide for some coffee to try to find out who the ones reserved the Coliseum that night. Carl manages to find out that the group probably belonged to Ruslan Ulmer. He's a wealthy aristocrat that tends to buy into less than legal affairs, such as smuggling alcohol into the US during the Prohibition, and some racketeering after a stock market crashed. The team decides to go ahead and head back to the lodge to avoid any further heat that'll be coming up from the recent events. When they make it back, the team gives the dagger to Dr. Leroux in order to do research on it. That brings up everything to speed on what has occurred up to the point first episode. There has been quite a bit skimmed over due to the likelihood of being not relevant for the future. If you're not interested in what some of the rule changes I've made are, this is your point to leave. The primary rule I've adjusted is the rules for using automatic weapons. The book refers to it as ROF, or rate of fire. Each firearm has an ROF value tagged with it, typically at 3 from automatic weapons. This means characters can elect to fire at a rate of 1 to their ROF value. They will roll the number chosen of their shooting die for 1 attack, but take a -2 for each dice rolled. This means that all damage is added together for 1 attack, making it fairly deadly if everything hits. But with a -2, it makes it fairly difficult to hit when you need to get a total roll of 4 to hit. It also increases the risk of critical failure, making it less tempting to do. I had an option to elect to not take the penalty, but the attacker must roll on a location table for each hit. The attack will roll a d12 and apply damage for the hit to that location. 1 is the groin, 2 to 3 is the right arm, 4 is the right leg, 5 to 8 is the torso, 9 the left leg, 10 to 11 the left arm, and 12 the head. A hit to the torso is a normal result of attack. The legs and arms ignore the first wound taken on their respective limb, but do have different effects. Head is normal +4 damage from called shot, and if the hit is in the groin, the victim loses the will to fight and gives up. Hits to the arm have a chance to disarm the target, and hits to the leg causes a loss to their pace or loss in overall movement. If the target is in half cover, all hits to the legs and groin will be blocked, but the cover has a chance to be destroyed with high enough damage roll. Targets in full cover are protected almost entirely, but the head and the cover can be destroyed like half cover. This addition goes both ways, which makes enemies much deadlier as well. But the players seem to be liking the change so far with no complaints. The second is just a minor change with the adventure deck. I've let the players elect to keep the cards at the end of the session, but what cards they have already used don't get shuffled back into the deck. As the show goes on, there will be rules I missed or just plain elect to forego as to keep the session going and fun for everyone. There will also be moments I eat my own words and bog myself down with unnecessary rules for certain moments. That's everything for now. If there are times in the future where a session is messed up or straight forgotten to be recorded, I'll try to do a brief summary video like this one to bridge the gap. To keep up to date on the series, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You can also join my Discord where I'll be doing my best to drop in updates on the series and all future projects I have going. That is all for now, so until next time, I'll catch you guys later.